Thank you so much, Scarlett. Welcome to this Linnean Society lunch lecture. And today it's my huge pleasure to welcome Paola Bonfante. Paola is a professor at the University of Torino in the Department of Life Science and Systems Biology. She's an emerita professor, professor emerita. And just brief introduction to Paola. I think you'll see her passion today. And the lecture today will be at the intersection of science and art. It's a wonderful, wonderful topic, I think, of interest to many of you. But Paola is an expert in plant symbiosis, notably with fungi. And she's had an illustrious career, had many contributions, both in terms of understanding the mechanisms of how these interactions function, but also using methods of cellular biology, molecular biology, and various genomics approaches to study a number of aspects of these interactions between plants and fungi, which, as we know, are incredibly important. She also, I think, one of my favorite piece of work that she's done is discovering endobacteria that live inside the fungal symbionts. So you have basically bacteria inside the fungus that lives inside the plant. So it's really interesting and complicated. So I don't need to go through all the recognitions that Paola had. She's a member of a number of national and international academies. She's one of the world's most cited scientists, listed among the top Italian scientists. But two things I want to mention. She's a member of the Accademia dei Lincei, which is one of the most ancient academies in the world, scientific academies, and actually the talk today is connected to that academia, so you see the connection later. I'm not going to steal her thunder. And the second thing is she actually wrote also a topic. She does a lot of public engagement and outreach, and she wrote a book called "The Plant Is Not an Island," which explores a number of topics that are of interest to her. So with that, sorry, I clicked on the wrong thing. But with that, Paula, this is your show. So welcome to the Linnean Society.
Thank you. Thanks, Sophie, for this great introduction. And it is really a great pleasure for me to be here. Just a moment that I arrive with my presentation. Here, yes. Exactly. So it is really a great pleasure for me to be here. It is an honor. And indeed, the issue, as Safin has already anticipated, it is not really in the core of my research. But anyway, I believe that it is an interesting story since it offers me the opportunity to present a quite a nice place in Rome and to reveal some connections between science and arts. So from where we start? We start from a district of Rome called Trastevere. And here you can see a building which hosts this historical Academy of Lincei that Professor Camune has already quoted. And in front of this building, there is a beautiful villa. This villa called Villa Farnesina is an iconic masterpiece of Renaissance architecture dating back to the early 15th century. And it was built up by an architect from Florence, Baldassare Peruzzi, and he gave a strong Florence signature to this beautiful building. But the most interesting part of this building is the so-called loggia. The loggia is at the ground floor of the building, overlooking the gardens and also the Tiber River. And when we look inside this loggia, we can see some frescoes, as maybe you can already identify here looking from outside. And these frescoes, which have been painted by Raphael, Sanzio, and many other artists, indeed have been investigated by many and many scholars since it really represents a sort of masterpiece. But today I would like mostly to focus my presentation starting from a very interesting book which has been written a couple of years ago by a colleague, a botanist of environmental botany working in Rome, Giulia Caneva. And she entitled this book as Wonder, Love and Power. But I would like to give a couple of words, first of all, on the story of the love. While there is a lot of love in the frescoes that we will, I will introduce you in a moment. Since, first of all, there is a very, very important and wealthy banker called Agostino Chigi. He was considered one of the most wealthy and richest men of his time. We are at the start of the 15th century. And he was in love with this Francesca Ordeaschi. And so in order to celebrate the wedding, he wanted to have this beautiful villa built up in this Trastevere district. And for the decoration of the villa, he involved the most important artist at the moment working in Rome, starting from Raphael. But Raphael gave us the opportunity to introduce you the second couple of lovers, since Raphael, as he is being painted here in this very famous painting by Ingres, was in love with this beautiful girl called La Farnesina, and indeed Raphael painted a lot of portraits of this beautiful lady. And also the nice story is that this lady was living just very close to the villa. Here we are really in the core of Trastevere district, and the villa is immediately behind the arch. So the story was that Raphael did a lot of portraits of Farnesina, also in the Loggia, when he's painting the Galatea story. And we can see here one of these beautiful portraits. But the story was that Raphael was so taken by this passion for this lady that he was not so completely devoted to the paintings of the villa. And so the banker was really very anxious, and he did a lot of pushes just to accelerate the work. But there is also a further level of love stories, since what Raphael painted was a love story between Cupid and Psyche, as we can see here in the ceiling, where there are these beautiful and very large frescoes. For example, here you can have a glimpse at the wedding between Cupid and Psyche at the end of many different stories. But as immediately you can see, all the frescoes are surrounded by garlands, festoons with a very, very rich vegetable decoration. And indeed, you can perhaps better appreciate here in this detail in the spandrels, where all the details of the story are better illustrated. For example, here there is Jupiter, which is speaking with Venus, his daughter, but the two gods are completely surrounded by this flower, plants, fruits decoration. And also here, for example, you can see Psyche, who is coming back with a jar of eternal beauty. And also she is completely surrounded by all this decoration. So the interesting point is that all this decoration was not done by Raphael, but by another artist called Giovanni from Udine, who is a very, very specialized really in the representation of natural things. And indeed, he has also done a decoration in the galleries of Vatican, just always focusing on these vegetable elements. So what is really very interesting is that looking at these frescoes, we have a really very, very interesting glimpse into plant biodiversity of the early 15th century. And indeed, personally, I like to use the word biodiversity, even if as already we know, biodiversity is a very recent word, but we have something of really unexpected. In fact, for example, Giulia Caneva, the botanist who did this research, has identified 170 different species from gymnosperm and angiosperms, but the most represented plants are Rosaceae, Asteraceae, Fabaceae, and a lot of cereals. But surely the most present plant is Malus domestica, in the, as the fruit. So there are a huge quantity of beautiful apples which are painted here. And the second interesting aspect is that the plants which are represented here are really coming from Asia, and in a special way they are coming from the so-called middle area, the fertile crescent area, where we know was one of the most important points of plant domestication. Some plants are coming from Africa, but also, and probably this is the most interesting aspect, there are many plants which are coming from America. But America was discovered in 1492, so more or less 10 years, only 10 years before that the villa was built and the frescoes were painted. So this offers us really a quite interesting documentation of the spreading of American plants in Europe. And so this testify that already many plants coming from America were already present in a European region. So when we give a look at these plants, and probably you have already perceived this aspect, more than flowers, we can give a look at many vegetables. So in my opinion, this is much more a sort of vegetable garden than not a flower garden. And in fact, there are, for example, this beautiful artichoke, this zucchini, or this asparagus. So really giving us a precise idea of what the people at the time of 15,000 was really used to eat in the, every day. And so I am absolutely not a specialist of art reading and interpretation, but just to remember you that Botticelli, who was exactly working exactly in the same period, gave a representation of plants, but mostly of flowers, which were completely different. Their representation of flowers are completely symbolic, and by contrast, what we can observe in the Loggia of the Villa Farnesina is something of a much more realistic, so a completely different behavior. And for example, just to show you some details, here we can observe a beautiful pumpkin surrounded by these grapes. And while this pumpkin is coming from America, and I will come back again on this a bit later, there are also other cucurbitacea, for example, this one, which by contrast is coming from Asia and from and also has a European roots. So we can observe a very precise and realistic illustration with all a lot of details. But what I would like also to share with you is that probably the presence that, as I have told you, there are a lot of cereals, also provides probably the possibility to see a sort of metaphor, since there is a lot of representation of wheat, which is surely a triticum aestivum on the basis of the ears and of the long spikes. And indeed, we know quite well that wheat represents an important commodity, but this not only in the past, also now. In fact, we know quite well that, for example, when the Ukraine war started 3 years ago, immediately there was a big drop down in the wheat market, and immediately this was leading to fluctuating quotations in the value of the wheat. So we can also believe and suggest that the representation of this wheat was also a metaphor for the power of the banker. Indeed, the banker had a lot of business also on the cereals. And indeed, there are also many other cereals which are presented. For example, this Ordeum vulgare, barley, since barley is one of the first domesticated cereal, and indeed it was domesticated at least 10,000 years ago, again in the Middle Asia area. And a lot of scientific efforts have been done not only to sequence the whole genome of the barley, but also, for example, in the most recent papers, the idea is to sequence all the collections which put together many different varieties, both cultivated, both wild type, due to, since the final objective is to create a pangenome. And in the most recent papers, the idea is to that the pangenome is mirrored by a pan-transcriptome, just really to have a full idea of the potentialities present in all the different varieties of barley. But there is also a very nice representation of a cereal coming from Africa, sorghum. And also here the representation is really beautiful. But in my opinion, one of the most interesting story is the representation of maize. Since everybody of us know quite well that maize is coming from America, from Mexico, and indeed in the frescoes here in Villa Farnesina, there are at least 3 different varieties which are painted. For example, here we have these very thin cups with this orange color, while by contrast, this one, the cobs have a different shape and have a different color, but anyway, they are completely different from the today cobs, which are larger and with a complete different color of seeds. And this, in my opinion, well mirrors the complex domestication story of maize that probably everybody in the audience knows is coming from the Teosinte, which represented the maize progenitor, and indeed the domestication already came back to at least 9,000 years ago, and the architecture of the two plants is completely different. But what is also interesting is that more recent investigations have revealed that it is true that a huge quantity of Teosinte pardiglumis are still present in the today maize. But they have discovered that there has also been a domestication starting from another variety of Teosinte, the so-called Teosinte mexicana, and the presence of this Teosinte mexicana provides at least from 15 to 25% of the genes present in the today maize. So the idea is that our today maize is probably the result of at least two different domestication ways, which happened in a different type. So the idea is that in the frescoes of Villa Farnesina, there is already a signature of this type of domestication. But I am also interested in the fact that maize is always very important for Mexican art. So, for example, I would like to show here a picture that I did in Mexico City on how Diego Rivera represented maize. And in very recent times, I have discovered that also other artists, which this is Tina Modotti, and she was a friend of Diego Rivera, so they working exactly in the same time. And again, the maize is present in many of her works, in this case, photographs. So indeed, maize represents really a very good continuity between science and art. But there are also other American plants. For example, Phaseolus bean is very present in the frescoes, and a lot of pumpkins. I identify these pumpkins as a sort of a triumph of pumpkins. They are very diverse, always surrounded by these grapes. This, for example, is a green pumpkin, or this one is a yellow one with a different shape, or there are also a lot of zucchini with different shapes and colors. So again, what about the domestication story of pumpkins? Pumpkins were domesticated again in the area around Mexico around 10,000 years ago. And there are really many experimental evidences of that. And there are also many data suggesting that the pumpkins were not only cultivated, grown for food, but they were also considered sacred plants, which were used during the ceremony. And indeed, and I apologize for the Italian slide, but some years ago, I found in this journal devoted to food, Italian Kitchen, a sort of a list of different pumpkins which can be used and selected depending on the food that you wanted to prepare. And so I was really very surprised to see that more or less all these different varieties which are present in the market, in the Italian markets today, are already represented in the frescoes of Villa Farnesina more than 600 years ago. So this really means that here the domestication process is really quite ancient. But not only pumpkins, there are also other cucurbitaceae. For example, this beautiful melon, since this melon is originated from Africa and from India. Another interesting story, in my opinion, is given by carrots. Since in the frescoes of Villa Farnesina, the carrots are painted as violet or little yellow carrots. And so when I saw them for the first time, I was not completely surprised. Since many years ago, maybe 15 years ago, I visited beautiful castles in close to Parma. Parma is an Italian city close to Bologna in the middle part of Italy. And looking at the ceiling, I have seen this bunch of white carrot. So I was very surprised by that, since I didn't know nothing about the domestication process of carrot. So coming back, I tried to understand a bit more. So I understood that the domestication of carrot is quite complicated, since surely the orange carrot that we are used to eat and to find in the markets are quite recent. since probably they are the products of a breeding activity which was produced in the Netherlands at the time of the Orange Dynasty, just to celebrate the success of Orange Dynasty against the Spanish dynasty. And so this happens more or less around the 16th century, so quite recent transformation. And in the meantime, I became aware that there is a lot of research trying to understand the domestication story and the iconography of carrot. So, for example, in this work, the author discussed two different paintings, one located in Amsterdam and the other in London, where these carrots are illustrated, but they are illustrated with a different color, again, from violet to yellow, or yellow as in this one. So I was not completely convinced, and I did not understand very well what happened. Just when I read a very interesting paper in Nature Plants, which is a very nice journal devoted to plant molecular aspects, and these authors really describe quite well the domestication events of a carrot, together with the diciamo on the basis of the carrot genome. And so they clearly describe how the wild type carrot is mostly white, as you can observe here, with a lot of lateral roots, and that the first domestication happened more or less 1,000 years ago. So it is quite recent event. And this first domestication event led to carrots with purple and yellow color. But as you can see here, and exactly as we have seen in the frescoes, the roots is a non-bolting taproot with a lot of all these lateral roots. And they are not yet orange, since exactly as I have already anticipated, the transformation of this purple and yellow carrot to the current orange carrot came back more or less to the 15th, 16th century with the domestication activity done by the breeders located in the Netherlands, just to celebrate the Orange Dynasty. But what happened that only in really much more recent times, and so at the end of the 18th century and in the past century, the nutritional value of carotene was discovered. And so due to this, there was a very, very strong genetic programs just leading to carrots with a huge quantity of carotene. And in the meantime, there was a process leading to the block of the lateral roots. So in this moment, we have a uniform root shape with our typical orange color. And so in my opinion, it is quite interesting, since we can really follow all these different steps also in the frescoes and in the paintings. And so this, in my opinion, represents a quite interesting way also to understand the relationships between the human domestication, the iconographic representation of a crop. But let me say still some words, if I have still one moment of time, on oranges, since oranges are really so beautiful, and there are many and many representation of oranges in the frescoes, usually surrounded by beautiful flowers, but also in this case by a leaf. So there is also a nice connection. And there are also a lot of representation of cedars, and of course also the lemon. And I would like to remember you that in Roman times, lemons were really very, very peculiar. And I have done this picture in Pompeii excavates. You know that Pompeii is this beautiful place where the ancient town was preserved. But the Romans did not know orange, our sweet orange, since the sweet oranges arrived to Europe only in the Middle Age, so they were not known to the ancient. And indeed, again, the science give us good suggestions, since again, in this paper, also this one probably published in Nature Communication some years ago, clearly explain how all the citrus fruits are originating in China, and mandarin, pomelo, and citron were probably the first ancestors of all the different citrus fruits that we are used to eat. But what is the process of domestication? It is really very interesting, and the authors described quite well what happened. Starting from the wild citrus, there was a strong decrease in fruit acidity, in the strong decrease in some secondary metabolites, in the disappear of the seeds, and we know quite well this feature in our current oranges, while by contrast there was a strong increase in the productivity of the fruit in this type of sexual reproduction. And indeed, in the paper there is also they also gave the molecular and biochemical details. I do not go into these details, but just to show that really it is quite interesting to see that thanks to this domestication process, the acidity which is present in the wild type citrus is absolutely lacking in our oranges which are present in the markets. But I would like to remember you that all these oranges which are beautifully painted in the villa have a sort of continuity in the garden which is outside the villa, where there is a beautiful citrus garden. For example, here I did this picture of these oranges or this big cedar coming from China. So this really confirm the idea of the architect to have an inner garden with the frescoes of Giovanni da Udine and the outer garden. But still one word on the oranges. I do not know whether you know the name of Giorgio de Chirico. Giorgio de Chirico is a very famous painting, considered the master of metaphysic painting. But he also had a more traditional period, and in this more traditional period, he depicted still life exactly as this one. And really, I believe that probably he was looking at the frescoes in Villa Farnesina, since there is really a strong overlapping. For example, we can see with these oranges. So just to arrive to the end, I would like to show you some fungi, some mushrooms, but, and since as Professor Camun has told, I have worked a lot on mushrooms and fungi which associate with plants, but indeed I cannot be sure that these fungi are mycorrhizal fungi, so I cannot say anything. So lastly, I would like to thank you for your attention, but also to hope that maybe if you visit Rome, you spend a bit of time in Villa Farnesina. Thanks again for your attention.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Paola. That's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. And I just realized that at my visit to Villa Farnesina, I missed quite a few things. I mean, the purple carrots, I missed those, I think. But that's really wonderful. And I just remind everyone that you can use the Q&A to ask questions. And there's already a couple of comments. Presentation absolutely fantastic. Thank you. What a wonderful lecture and so on. So I think it's very well received. Paola, thank you so much.
No,
So we have a couple of questions actually from Cheryl Lynn. So the first question is, do the Italian people perceive American Mexican vegetation to be more esteemed than European vegetation? What do you think? Is that true?
so I am not so sure, since it depends on the level of knowledge of the people. So I cannot say Italian. So my opinion is that nobody, in at least a huge quantity of people, is not aware of the fact that tomato are coming from America. And usually nobody thinks of that. Usually Italian are very proud of our tomatoes, and they believe that they are coming from Italian. So it's really something that it is interesting, since all the story of the domestication of plants give us a lot of information, and also of social and also ideas on our society and of the relevance of immigration. So a lot of things.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, I know. I sometimes try to wonder what the Romans were really eating. It must have been somewhat boring compared to today's Italian cuisine, I guess, without the tomatoes
Yeah,
and all of that, right? Yeah.
yes.
There's another question about the villa. So, is it still inhabited,
Ah,
patronized by the
ah,
family and so on? Is there trust taking care of it?
yes. So this is a very interesting question, since the villa had a very difficult story. It was attacked by barbarians, when the barbarians invaded Rome in the 16th. And then it was completely a desolated place, and then it was restored. And at the end, the Italian Republic, after the war, gave the villa to Academy of Lincei. And so Academy of Lincei is using the villa for developing researches, studies, and also there is a sort of very close building where a lot of events are done. So in this moment it belongs to the Academy of Lincei.
Excellent. We have more laudatory comments here. Thank you. Fascinating, comprehensive, well illustrated. Many thanks for the wonderful presentation. Here we have Carly Cohen Bradshaw is going to take her daughter to visit the villa. So
Yes.
here inspired someone
It is
to go
always
there.
open. Yes, it is always open all the days,
Yeah,
and usually people are very nice. And so, but as you told Sofian, it is not so easy to look
yeah,
at all these frescoes. So personally, I have understood better looking before in the books and then
yeah,
trying
yeah.
to identify the story.
Yeah, and I based on my visit, I highly recommend finding a guide also. I think
Yes.
it adds a lot of value to the visit. We have a question from Shahrazad van der Zijden. You mentioned that the pumpkins are always surrounded by grapes in the frescoes. What's the significance of this
Yes,
pairing?
I'm so sorry, but I cannot do a reply. It is something that I have noticed, and indeed there is a continuous association between grapes and pumpkins, but not only pumpkins, also the other cucurbitaceae, for example, melon. So I do not know whether there is a specific meaning or it is a problem of colors, since the violet, the purple of the grapes combines very well with the color of the pumpkins, but I do not know whether there is a meaning.
Excellent. Okay, so we have another question here from Elizabeth Whitfield. I'm interested in European images of maize in art since I visited Antwerp's Jesuit church. And do you or your colleagues know how common this is in Jesuit churches, the representation of maize, and how is this a metaphor for
Ah, yes.
Jesus' travels and so on? Do you know more about that?
No, yes, so sorry, I do not know. What I have really understood that maize is really something of sacred for Mexican people. And indeed, if you look at Diego Rivera paintings, there is a lot of maize. And so this is quite interesting, but also the very fascinating story of this Tina Modotti, who was of Italian origin, and then she went to the States, and then due to for her political passions, she could not stay in the States, and so she went to Mexico, and she was, and so she too, she did a lot of photographs of maize fields. So indeed, it is a plant which is inside the heart of Mexican people. Yeah.
Yeah, very good. And I would also advise all of you who are going to Mexico City to visit, I think it was in the Palacio Nacional, where there's all these Diego
Exactly.
Rivera's
Exactly.
murals. And it's also another triumph of botany there.
Ah, yes.
Yeah, and I remember vividly this one fresque where titled El Mundo debe a Mexico, the word owes to Mexico all these different crops. It's absolutely stunning, actually.
Very
Um,
fascinating. Yeah.
yeah. And of course, my comment is that the word owes to Mexico also pathogens like Phytophthora infestans, the potato blight. So
Yeah.
let's not forget
Yes.
that it's also
Yes.
bringing pathogens and parasites
Yes.
to Europe. We have a question from Steph Borneman with exotic fruits and vegetables representing wealth. Were there everyday local fruits and vegetables missing? Are there things missing here? Or are they representing really a symbol of wealth?
Yeah. Yes, I am not so sure, since usually, as far as I know, I really I was thinking much more on wheat, since also starting from the mythology, Greek and Latin mythology, the queen of wheat, Ceres, Seer, I am not so sure how to pronounce the name of the god, was really very, very important. And so she was really controlling the destiny of the human population, since depending of her faculty, she could allow the wheat to grow or not to grow, and so to have food for people. So I mostly focused my attention to wheat due to this traditional mythology in Greek and in Roman tradition, but I do not know our.
Well, I think Steph has a point because I don't see any of the brassicas, the cabbage, and so on. I don't see radish, which are also Roman crops, right? And so radish is a typical Roman crop.
Yes,
And
so you are right, but there are a lot of brassicas in
oh,
the
okay,
frescoes. Yes,
I
a
see.
lot. Again, they are so beautiful, really brassica
Okay, I see.
vulgaris,
Yeah,
fantastic representation. So I decided to give more attention to the story of domestication, since I
yeah,
am
makes
very
sense.
interested in that. And so, but you are right. And but what I would like to add is that tomato are not present at all, and also potato. And so I am wondering whether they were already arrived. So tomato probably they were not yet present in Rome, since tomato arrived a bit later, and they stopped in France, where
Mhm,
they were cultivated in Versailles garden as a decoration.
mhm,
And only later they arrived in Naples, and they were started to be eaten. So this is not surprising. By
mhm.
contrast, I am a bit surprised that potato is not present. Mm.
Yeah. Okay, we have more wonderful comments. There's even greeting from Brazil.
Yeah,
So yeah, there you go. So and I think Carmen Loyola has a very nice comment here. She says that when you talk about botanical triumph, Giuseppe Arcimboldo
Boldo.
comes to
Yes,
mind.
yes,
So
yes,
yeah,
yes. This is true. It's beautiful, beautiful suggestion. Yes,
yeah,
but
good.
maybe
We have another question here. We need to wrap up soon, I think. But thank you for the most interesting, especially the portrait. No, that's not a question. That's a comment. Thank you about the portrayal of pumpkins. All of that. Am I missing question here? No, yeah, there's one. Okay, Sharon again. Is the mushroom a truffle? Do the
Ah,
15th century people in Italy already enjoyed cuisine with truffles?
yes, yes, this is true. I am a bit well prepared, if you want, on that, since I participate with some colleagues to the genome sequencing of truffles. And truffles, of course, are mycorrhizal fungi, and their story is quite interesting. There is a lot of iconographic representation of truffles, starting, they were already known by Roman, but apparently they were not loved by the Agostino Chigi, by the banker, and so Giovanni da Udine did not represent them. But usually truffles are presented in underground landscapes. By contrast, this is a surface landscape.
Okay, thank you. I think we can wrap up with a question by Mikhail Bogdan, and his point is about Spain and Portugal. Obviously, they were the first to reach China and so on. And the question is whether the bankers, the Chigi bankers, were financing the Portuguese or the Spanish or were involved in that. Do you know about this, Paula?
No, I know that he had a sort of local banks in many, many different European places, but surely he had a huge quantity of business with different items, but I do not know exactly which type of contacts with China. I do not know.
Excellent. Wonderful. And thank you all for all your questions and wonderful discussion and feedback. I
Thank
think we all agree that this was a wonderful, entertaining way to spend a Wednesday lunch. And thank you.